We are joined here today by a few great speakers. I'm looking forward to the presentation this morning. I did want to start off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Kristen Morose. I'm one of the co-directors with the Minnesota Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations program, and I work at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And I wanted to start off this morning with just a couple personal remarks on the recent events that we have faced in Minnesota and the deaths of George Floyd and Dante Wright. While yesterday's trial verdict resulted in accountability, it's just the beginning of our journey towards justice here in Minnesota and elsewhere. The Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations program supports Minnesota communities in building resilient and inclusive communities that meet the needs of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other populations historically harmed by environmental injustice and the disparities that result from exclusionary practices. Personally, I'm inspired to build a more equitable and just program for Minnesota communities. And then additionally, I wanted to acknowledge the land on which we currently stand, located on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous people. Dakota and Ojibwe land was ceded through 15 different treaties across land that is now known as Minnesota. And this land holds great historical, spiritual, and personal significance for its original stewards, the Native nations and peoples across the region. Dakota and Ojibwe people and communities have taken care of this land's trees well before silvicultural degrees and forestry staff were around. Today, tribal nations are leading the way in understanding how our changing climate is impacting the forest community, and I hope that that knowledge and Indigenous solutions can continue to be a part of the conversations that we're having on this particular topic. And I'm going to go ahead and close our poll here. And give me 1 second. All right. So for those of you, I think many of you are familiar with the Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations program. For those of you that aren't, welcome. We're a challenge assistance and recognition program for communities taking sustainable actions across the state of Minnesota. We're going to start this morning by, since we have a few in the audience, it's easier to do introductions in some breakout rooms and hopefully have some networking opportunities. So I'm going to go ahead and put you into random rooms. And go ahead and introduce yourself, who you work with or who you might represent or why you're interested in this particular topic. And then reflect back on that original opening question of your favorite tree species and think about how your favorite tree species might be impacted by the changing climate in Minnesota or wherever you live, or wherever your tree species might be. Okay, so give me 1 second here to get you into rooms. Oh, here we go. And you should see it pop up for you, and it'll move you in there, or you should be able to click as well. And do turn on your audio and your video for this portion for sure. And I will call you all back here in 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, I think some of us and anyone who's joining new gets to stay in this main room here. So if you want to feel free to introduce yourself, turn on your video, and who are you with, and any reflections on your favorite tree species. Roger, are you ready?
Yeah, yep, I'm here. Well, I'm Roger Steinkamp. I'm in Faribault, Minnesota, and I'm head of the Environmental Commission for the City Council. And I guess I'm just kind of tuning in to get better ideas of which tree species and the impact that the environment is having and which ones are most likely. You know, we normally hear about trees when they get sick and start dying, but sometimes we don't think ahead as to what would be the best ones to have.
Yeah, definitely. And it's difficult right now, right? There's, a lot of unknowns, and how do we plant for something that, it could be around 50 years down the road, and we don't know what that's going to look like.
Well, very true. And I mean, although I grew up in Minnesota, out in a rural part of southern Minnesota, um, I it's curious. Each town or community has their favorite tree species, and goodness knows where those notions came from.
Yeah,
But you know, so you're dealing with city councils, and I mean, local politics is pretty interesting because you're not necessarily dealing on uh, good fact-based information. It's tradition and personal likes and dislikes.
definitely. Thank you. I see Gina, Julie, Caitlin, Tracy. Would any of you like to turn on your video if possible and introduce yourself and why today's topic was interesting for you? We're in small breakout rooms for those of you just joining us. I know I think a couple of you popped in, and then we'll go back into the main room shortly. Bandwidth going. Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to our first speaker here. I'll introduce Emma Schultz with the Community Forest Project Specialist at the Department of Natural Resources. Emma, I see your screen and looks like you are ready to go.
There we go. There we go. Unmuted. All set? Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. I always forget to unmute and then I hide my button.
I'll also remind everyone, Emma, for any of you that have questions, feel free to add those during the chat as Emma's presenting. We'll have some Q&A time after our first two speakers here.
Sounds good. I'll get started. Again, my name is Emma Schultz. I work in the Urban and Community Forest stream within the Division of Forestry at the DNR, and it consists of myself and Valerie McClanahan. She is the Urban and Community Forestry Coordinator for the state of Minnesota. Provide a variety of assistance through the UCF team to municipalities across the state. The number one thing that I do is I facilitate grants to local units of government for community forest management. And the type of grant, what it looks like, is highly dependent on the funding that we receive. So depending on the funding and any language in the funding, we can fund things ranging from public tree inventories to emerald ash borer management plans to tree removals and replantings. Some of our grants only fund tree planting, so it is highly dependent on what the funding is. And there are a couple potential funding items on the horizon. We're waiting for the legislature to pass some bills, so stay tuned. We may have future funding soon. And then aside from grants, we provide a variety of other technical assistance to communities, and that's what I'm going to focus on here today. So I'm going to talk through our 2010 Community Tree Survey, tree planting techniques to ensure success of the trees that you're planting, young tree maintenance, and species recommendations. I'm going to keep everything really basic today because I believe that everyone deserves to start from the same point, and I know that depending on where you are, you have more or less infrastructure and knowledge as a starting point. So I want to make sure everybody has the same basic knowledge. So jumping into the 2010 Community Tree Survey, this was a large-scale effort done by the DNR in collaboration with a large network of volunteers back in 2010 that surveyed most municipal entities across the state. So far I've only had one request from a community who didn't have a survey done for them, but for the most part they were done. And it estimated the percentages of the tree canopy broken down by species within those communities. So if we look at this graph here, this is an overall representation of trees in Minnesota communities. So we see that the largest piece of the pie is taken up by maple trees at 20.2%. And that's not surprising. Maple trees provide beautiful fall foliage that municipalities love to plant. They're aesthetically pleasing, and there's a wide number of maples that can be planted to kind of extend that beautiful color season. Second most commonly planted or commonly found was spruce, and there are a number of native spruce. However, in urban areas, most of the spruce that we tend to find, especially in landscaped areas, are Colorado blue spruce and Black Hill spruce, and these spruce are not native here, and so while they have beautiful growth form, they do tend to suffer from some issues due to the increased humidity here versus where you might find them native. And then the third most commonly found tree in 2010 was ash. The story, if we were to redo this right today, it might look a little bit differently. In 2010, emerald ash borer, the invasive non-native pest, was just getting established in St. Paul. It had only been found 1 year before that. So at that point, it hadn't spread to far across the state like it has today. And so in portions of the state where emerald ash borer has gained a stronghold, we now see drastically reduced ash numbers, whether that's due to natural mortality or removals by municipalities. So there are still plenty of areas of the state where EAB has not yet touched. And so while these numbers may have changed for some communities, it's still a good starting point. And I'm going to jump into some guidelines that we have, the 2010-5 guidelines, which are basically a way to strive for a more diverse urban tree canopy. So within these guidelines, this would mean that a community has no more than 20% of their trees within a single family, 10% of their trees within a single genus, or 5% within a single species. And I'm going to go over these terms on the next slide just to make sure that you know what they mean. And I want to stress here that these are just guidelines, and you can use them and incorporate them as you try to diversify your plans for your community's future, or as you move forward with planting plans now. But I understand that this may not be immediately attainable, especially in large municipalities. Species that are commonly found, there are thousands and thousands of those trees. And just because there's a lot of them, they're still serving a purpose and they're providing many benefits. So I'm in no means suggesting that we go out and cut down all these commonly found trees. I'm saying that this is something to strive for as you move towards the future. So getting a little bit more into explaining the family, genus, species, I'm going to actually work my way up from the species. So a species is a group of trees that are made up of similar individuals. So red maple, for instance. A genus is a group of trees that are relatively similar but might have some small differences. So maple is, or Acer, is the genus that red maple is found within, along with 132 other species. So here in Minnesota, we've got red maple, silver maple, sugar maple. We also have a bunch of non-native maples that are frequently planted in urban areas. And then family is the largest umbrella that kind of covers over groups of genera being the plural of genus, that either closely or somewhat resemble each other, whether that's in appearance or in character. So the soapberry family, Sapindaceae, is the family that maples are a part of. They were previously grouped in their own family, Aceraceae, until recently. But as of now, maples are included with their nearest relative, horse chestnuts, in the soapberry family. So if we look to our guidelines, our 2010-5 guidelines, we would recommend that no more than 20% of a community's trees be made up of maples and horse chestnuts combined. I'd like to touch on the two terms towards the bottom of the screen because they're important to distinguish between, as you know, maybe as you're looking to purchase trees from a nursery. Variety is a subdivision or subset of a species that's found in nature that has something distinct about it. So for example, the Drummond's maple has 3 to 5 lobed leaves that always have hairy undersides. It's less cold tolerant and prefers moister or swampier sites than red maple generally does. And that compares with cultivar, which is a variety that's been selected for and then cultivated to emphasize those unique traits that were found. So for example, the autumn flame, you'll notice that cultivars always have this single quote around them to distinguish that they're a cultivar of the species. And that was a male selection of red maple that's noted for many leaves that are smaller in size than the average red maple, color that develops earlier than average, and then really nice fall coloring. So this is a very busy graph, but this is an example of what the 2010 Community Tree Survey looks like. This particular table is for the city of North Mankato. So to direct your attention, those 3 green columns over on the right are live tree percentages and numbers. And so if we go line by line, we see that in the city of North Mankato, it was estimated that the most common genus was maple at 24.5% with over 12,000 individual trees estimated, followed by ash at 23% and spruce at 13% or so. And so that's, you know, a further explanation or clarification on how, you know, removing trees to meet diversity guidelines is not going to happen, and that's not encouraged. It's more as you move toward your future of a more diverse canopy, looking to those species that are further down the list or maybe don't even appear on this list and including them in your planting plans. So we have this community tree survey available. If you would like to request it, you can reach out to me and I can provide it to you. You know, it does seem old, yes, but 10 years, 11 years is a lot less in the lifetime of a tree than it is for us. So it's a great starting point if you don't have any current public tree inventory or if your tree inventory is out of date as well. It's a starting point. It gives you something to stand on and something to look at and strive for. I'd like to show a short tree planting video. I hope you can hear the sound. If you can't, it doesn't really matter. Everything should appear on the screen that you need to see. As we talk about planting trees for diversifying our community canopies, there's really no point in planting if we don't do it right. And it's very common to make a number of tree planting mistakes. So everyone can always use a refresher, and I'm going to go ahead and play this. All right, let's see if I can pass this to my next slide here. Here we go. So that was the right way to do it. And now to go over those common mistakes so that you can strive to avoid them. A common mistake is leaving the girdling roots intact. And that's when, if you pull the tree out of the container, you see that there's roots starting to circle around the root ball, around the dirt. And over time, those can girdle the tree. So that's why you saw them doing the box cut in the video, to remove any potential girdling roots that are going around or in the bottom of the containerized tree. And that will help it grow freely and in a normal way that will be successful over time. Probably the most common planting mistake is planting trees too deeply. And so you saw that in the video as well, striving to plant it at the proper depth. You want to plant the tree, and you can look up plenty of videos and guidelines on doing this, but you would go to where it first creates the first root, or where the root flare is, and you just want to make sure that it's not too deep, because if it is, you can smother the tree over time. And then in line with that, another common error is to do volcano mulching, which is just piling the mulch up in like a pyramid or a volcano shape next to the tree trunk, which can also smother it and then can also lead to increased rotting. So those are things to avoid as you plant trees. And young tree maintenance is just as crucial as proper planting techniques. We have some information on our website to help guide you, along with additional videos on proper mulching and proper watering. But just to touch on it really quickly, proper care for young trees includes watering, and you want to water 15 to 25 gallons once per week for the first 3 to 5 years, unless you've had a significant rainfall during that week, and that's during the growing season when the ground is not frozen. And if you do that, that sets your tree up to be much more successful into the future. It will help it establish and grow its roots so that it can survive and thrive. Another proper care technique includes mulching. So you want to follow the 3-3-3 rule of mulching, which would be to have a 3-foot diameter sphere of mulch around the tree. Make sure to pull that mulch back 3 inches from the trunk. As I mentioned before, we don't want any mulch touching the trunk. And then have mulch at a 3-inch depth. And having proper mulch will provide numerous benefits, including protecting your tree's roots during the harsh winter months. And then lastly, pruning. Pruning is an essential part of young tree care. A lot of the trees that are planted on the urban landscape today are not planted for strong branch structure. They're planted for other things that we appreciate from them, like their flowers in the spring or their beautiful color in the fall. But a lot of those trees have typically poor branch attachment and structure on their own, and so they need proper pruning to help them develop the strength that they need to withstand all of the storms that they're going to encounter during their lifetime, whether it's windstorms or heavy snow loads. And making sure that you're following proper pruning techniques will speed up the wound healing, because pruning creates a wound, right? So it creates a little opening on the tree, and doing it right will make sure that the tree is able to heal as quickly as possible. Moving into some species recommendations, I'd like to start with what to avoid planting. First of all, the DNR has a list of invasive terrestrial plants, and on that list are a number of trees. You can see that list here. Now, a number of them I'm sure you wouldn't even consider planting. You would probably never go out there to plant a buckthorn, but there are a number of trees on this list that I know that communities are actively planting, especially the Amur cork tree. And this was just added to our list within the past year. So through the past year, we were allowing it as an eligible expense for reimbursement within our grants, but going forward, that has been prohibited. All of these trees show the potential to be quite invasive, and so that's why they've been added to this list, and we recommend that you do not plant them. And if you'd like more information on that, please reach out. Moving to what to plant. What you see here is a little graphic showing the best native yard trees for our changing climate, broken down by region of the state. And all of these trees are anticipated to do well in facing climate change here in Minnesota. I would stress that not all of these are excellent choices for boulevard trees. For example, cottonwood and silver maple grow incredibly large, so if you have limited space, we don't recommend that you plant those. But a number of these do make for good, suitable boulevard trees, and all of them could make for good park trees if they have enough room. Diving into it a little bit deeper in terms of what to plant, I would recommend that you utilize a list of climate-adapted, regionally native species as the backbone of your planting project. And we have a number of native trees that make excellent street trees, and I'll go through the list quickly of some that come to mind to me. The Princeton and Valley Forge American elm cultivars are Dutch elm disease resistant, and they could make fantastic street trees with structure similar to that characteristic vase-shaped elm look. Basswood or American linden are already widely planted, at least in the Twin Cities, as street trees, and while they suffer from frost cracking, they tend to heal over in the growing season and do well. Black cherry could be considered. Black walnut makes a great tree. You do have to be a little weary of the mess it might make, so I would focus areas that maybe have a wider boulevard or if mess is less of an issue. Bur oak, swamp white oak, and white oak are all within a sort of a white oak umbrella, and being that they're white oaks, that means they're more resistant to oak wilt. So while I wouldn't necessarily recommend planting red oaks, I do recommend this sort of suite of white oak species. Hackberry is a fantastic tree, which is great for tough sites. That makes it perfect for the urban environment, especially when trees are faced with droughty conditions. It's just as good as establishing on its own as if it's planted. It's a good selection. Then we have shagbark or bitternut hickory. Those are both great hickory options native to southern Minnesota that are starting to move northward as the climate is changing. They also would leave a bit of a mess from the nuts, so focus that in areas with wider boulevards perhaps. And then Kentucky coffee tree. Similar story, if you have a tree with seed pods, you can get a male variety, but another beautiful tree. And then we strive to recommend that communities always plant the right tree in the right place. And so a lot of times there are limitations in your urban area as to what is available to plant. You might have a small size, very small boulevard in which to plant, or perhaps you have utility lines overhead. And this is an area where I think there is great potential for communities to sort of shift some of what they're planting if they want fall color to some smaller stature trees that do produce beautiful fall color. So I've got another list for you here of great small stature trees that all produce nice fall coloring. So the Allegheny or the downy serviceberries make a nice yellow to red coloring in the fall. Mountain ash is great for the northern part of the state. It's salt tolerant and it has nice yellow foliage in the fall. The American hornbeam, also called blue beech, I saw that popped up on the favorite tree list at the start, is a great option, and it produces yellow to maroon fall foliage that's really nice. The nannyberry viburnum is another one that has gorgeous red maroon coloring in the fall. There's a number of hawthorns, including a thornless hawthorn, but if you choose the downy hawthorn, that will give you some yellow to red fall color. And then lastly, the pagoda dogwood is a native dogwood that has vibrant maroon coloring in the fall. And then I would say, yes. What's that?
I think you're good.
Okay. I would just lastly say that you could consider trying some of the species that are moving into our region that are becoming adapted in our changing climate. So those species that we're looking to that are starting to naturalize here or will be soon. On the horizon would be eastern redbud, American sycamore, shellbark hickory, mockernut hickory, pignut hickory, Ohio buckeye, and even post oak. So I by no means recommend making these a major portion of your planting plans, but perhaps you can try a couple and see how they do. And I would say that your ultimate goal should be to balance a species' ability to do well in our Minnesota climate with their ability to do well in an urban landscape. So There are many trees that don't do great in an urban landscape, and knowing which ones will set you up for success. And then lastly, my last recommendation is to avoid planting any non-native species near wooded or natural areas. I would focus those plantings, if you're doing them, somewhere far away from natural areas to minimize the chance that they will escape and become established in those natural areas. So with that, thank you, and we'll move over to some climate adaptation information from Leslie.
Thanks, Emma. There are a couple requests for those species that you were just listing on that last slide. Is
Sure.
it possible to get that list from you and we can share that with the webinar recording?
Yeah, definitely, we can do that.
Great. Thank you, Emma and Leslie. It looks like your slides are showing. So welcome, Leslie Brandt with the USDA Forest Service.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much. I'm with the U.S. Forest Service and with the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science. And the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science is a chartered organization primarily funded by the Forest Service, but also includes a number of university partners, the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission, American Forests, and the National Council for Air and Stream Improvement. And what we set out to do is to provide practical information, resources, and assistance related to forests and climate change. So we look both at adaptation, how we can adjust our management in light of a changing climate, and then also at carbon management. So how can we use trees to help reduce the amount of carbon in our atmosphere. So many of you are probably aware that temperatures are going up across the state of Minnesota, and here in the Twin Cities where I am, we've been increasing at a rate of about 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit per decade. So over the last several decades. And we expect that this trend will continue and that temperatures could rise by 3 to 9 degrees by the end of the century. It's also getting wetter. We have had fewer extremely dry years and more extremely wet years. And in addition to that, we've seen more heavy precipitation events. And so this is showing precipitation from 1940 to present, and we've been increasing at about 1 inch per decade. And a lot more of that, again, is falling as these heavy rain events where 1 inch or more of rain is happening within a single day. What we anticipate in the near future for our trees is a shift in climate suitability. And one way we can look at that is by looking at hardiness zone projections. So hardiness zones are determined by the coldest temperature that area experiences over a 30-year period. And so right now, Minnesota is about a zone 3 in the north to a zone 5 in the south. And by the time we get to the end of the century, under a high emission scenario, we could get up to a zone 7 in the southern part of the state under a high emission scenario. So that's if we continue to release greenhouse gases at a rate similar to what we're doing now. If we took dramatic actions to reduce greenhouse gases, we still expect that we're going to be shifting about 1 hardiness zone up from what we are now. What I'm going to talk about today are 3 things. First, some resources for the state of Minnesota on how tree species might be affected by a changing climate. Then I'll walk through an action guide that we recently developed with American Forests, and that provides some strategies that you could take to prepare your urban forest for a changing climate. And then I'll give an example of how Minnesota cities are already adapting to climate change. So first, those resources. One of the resources that we have is on our website, forestadaptation.org. And if you go to the urban focus area, you will see this landing page with a number of little dots. And if you click on one of those dots, and there's currently 2 for Minnesota, one Rochester area, and one Twin Cities area, and we are just kind of populating this, so we hope to have more. You will get a resource page that includes a list of climate adapted trees for that location. So this is an example of what we have for Rochester. So this will explain vulnerability of tree species, changes in hardiness zones, and then also heat zones, which are determined by the number of days over 30 degrees Celsius. So that's kind of looking at the highest temperatures a tree can tolerate. And then the adaptability of different species. So looking at their ability to withstand a number of different pests and diseases and drought and flooding. And so we put all this together and we provide a vulnerability index for each species under a low emissions and a high emissions scenario. And this is looking at the vulnerability of that species over this, this century. So a species that has a low vulnerability would have either a green triangle or a blue circle. And so that can help you determine which species might be appropriate for your particular area. So an example of a species that ends up being relatively adaptable with low vulnerability is yellowwood. This is a species that's native to areas around Kentucky and Tennessee, but it is very able to withstand cold temperatures here in Minnesota. I have one planted in my backyard, actually. It's very beautiful. I would not recommend this for northern Minnesota, but this is a species for places like the Twin Cities and south that could be incorporated into planting lists. And this is in the legume group, so it's not an overplanted family currently in many areas. Another species that was mentioned earlier is the Kentucky coffee tree. So this is another species that is very adaptable to a number of different conditions, provides excellent shade, and is a really good street tree. Now, if you're looking for resources for rural forests, we also have a number of other resources. We have this great little climate change field guide for northern Minnesota forests. This is something that would be really appropriate if you're managing a more traditional forest project and you're trying to look at what species would be appropriate for different forest types. And then a more in-depth look at that information is provided in this Minnesota Forest Ecosystem Vulnerability and Assessment and Synthesis. And I'll provide links to these resources after my talk today, so don't worry about writing down all of those links. We also have species lists for different ecoregions within Minnesota that focus on native trees. So we have lists for places like the driftless area, so that would be places around like Winona and other places in southern Minnesota, southeastern Minnesota, and then lists for northeastern Minnesota as well. And so this will include which species are likely to lose suitable habitat and what species might gain suitable habitat that you might consider for future planting. Now I want to talk about how you take that information and incorporate it into your management strategies. We have developed a new, what we're calling the Climate and Health Action Guide, and this is available on the Vibrant Cities Lab website. And if you haven't checked out Vibrant Cities Lab, it's a great resource that's developed by the Forest Service and American Forests to provide information on managing urban forests, managing community forests, for a variety of different goals and objectives. And it's really user-friendly. Check it out. And so we have a new action guide in there that is really focused on how you can adjust your management to align with climate change adaptation, climate change mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also providing human health benefits. And this action guide goes through a 5-step process that we also use in our online adaptation workbook, and I'll provide that link as well. And so it asks you to think about what your goals and objectives are for an area, assess your climate change impacts and vulnerabilities, evaluate your goals and objectives given changes in climate, identify and implement adaptation actions, and then evaluate your effectiveness. So each of these steps provides resources to get you started on thinking through those steps. And then we have this online workbook that can be used if you want to develop an adaptation plan for a particular area. One key element of the Climate and Health Action Guide is this adaptation menu. And this provides you with a list of potential strategies that you could take to adapt your urban forest to climate change. And this runs the gamut of very fundamental things that we probably are doing already, like maintaining and increasing the extent of our urban forests, to strategies that are more aligned with adjusting to future conditions. So moving at-risk species or disfavoring species that might be maladapted. This is organized in a tiered hierarchy, and it's very comprehensive. It includes over 500 peer-reviewed citations, and it's been thoroughly peer-reviewed, and it will be coming out and published later this spring. So what's in this strategy menu? First, it starts with asking you to think about the social systems and communities that you're working with and integrating climate change, urban forestry, and human health actions together so that they aren't considered in their silos, but rather integrated. Then we talk about reducing the impact of human health threats and stressors using urban trees and forests. So how can we use urban trees to reduce the urban heat island effect, reduce stormwater, thinking about things like which species might be allergenic that could pose a risk to people as well. The third strategy is about maintaining or increasing the extent of urban forests and vegetative cover. This is really the mitigation strategy. How can we increase our canopy cover and increase our carbon storage in our urban forest? The 4 through 6 strategies are really focused on maintaining a very diverse, ecologically functioning urban forest. So how can we reduce our biological stressors by increasing our diversity, planting species that are more adaptable to those changes, and thinking about not just species diversity, but also diversity of genotypes and functions, and so that our urban tree canopy is able to withstand a variety of different stressors that are thrown at it. The 7th strategy is focused on altering our urban ecosystems towards new and expected conditions. So this is where we might think about incorporating species that we hadn't used before. So things that are underplanted. It could also be things like transitioning to a new ecotype. So perhaps before you were planting a forest, but you're going to transition to a prairie and some systems that are expected to become drier. The final strategies are focused on promoting mental and social health. So how can we use our urban forests to provide co-benefits to people? Research is showing that just being around nature can reduce stress, improve both mental and physical health, and lead to better social cohesion and even a reduction in crime rates. So how can we think about that and integrate that into our strategies? So I want to just finish with sharing an example of how people are already integrating these strategies. The city of Minneapolis recently participated in one of the trainings that we offer. We have one going on right now, and I'd be happy to share those opportunities with you. This is a free training that we offer that is 7 weeks long that helps you develop an adaptation plan for your urban or rural forest. We have a number of different examples for Minnesota on our website, and you can check those out. And so the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board was one of our recent participants last year, and they were looking at how they might adjust their street tree planting guidelines to be more resilient to a changing climate. Some of the impacts that they were concerned about were more days exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit, increasing winter low temperatures that could create more pest pressure, but also new opportunities for species to plant. Increased precipitation, which can be both a good thing for growth and establishment, but also these heavy rain events leading to more localized flooding. Some of the strategies that they chose were to maintain and increase the extent of urban forests and vegetative cover by identifying challenging sites for tree establishment and then increasing the investment on those sites to aid establishment. Looking at the taxonomic, functional, and structural diversity was a key part of their work. So they're continuing to utilize their existing street tree planting guidelines, which prescribe diversity at multiple scales across the urban forest. So they're planting multiple different species from different families within an individual block. They also looked at those projections that I shared with you to see if there were species on that list that they shouldn't be planting or others that were on that list that they haven't been planting, so that they could ensure that they were maximizing their diversity. And then finally, they're continuing species and cultivar trials, especially with the University of Minnesota, to look at potential new or rarely used cultivars and species that could be incorporated into their mix. If you're interested in learning more about any of this work, you can check out the Climate and Health Action Guide on the Vibrant Cities Lab or visit our website, forestadaptation.org. And I'll also provide some additional links in the chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. It looks like there's a lot of thank yous in the chat for all of this great information from both you and Emma. I want to take some time now to see if there are any additional questions. I loved the sidebar question on crabapple trees going on over here. That was really useful information. It looks like we have one hand raised. So Kathy Jones, do you have a question you want to unmute yourself and ask?
I just was concerned about the photo indicating mulching around trees. I'm very concerned about volcano mulching, which is used extensively in our area.
Yeah, I would say it's a big problem, and it's a lack of education. So the more we can do to help spread the word that there is a proper way to mulch and it's not mulching too much, the more mulch, not the better. So the more we can do to spread that message, hopefully it in time will trickle down to all those volcano mulchers out there.
I like the term to donut mulch instead of volcano mulch.
Plus donuts are delicious. I'm with you there.
Were there any other questions from the attendees? I think a lot of the questions asked in the chat have been answered, but if anyone wants to expand on any of that or ask a follow-up question.
I would say that the link that Jen provided, the recommended trees for Minnesota, it's a University of Minnesota extension publication, and it's broken down by region of the state. They have recommended deciduous and conifer trees, as well as trees to try. And while it's a little bit outdated, there's a few trees on there that we would not recommend planting, including the cork tree. It's a good useful article, and it does list if a tree is suitable for being a street tree, etc. So it's a great publication to use as a reference starting point.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. If one pops up as we're going through the next couple of presentations, feel free to add those in the chat or raise your hand. Otherwise, we can go ahead and move on to our next presenters. We're going to hear a little bit more from Hennepin County, City of Rochester, as well as talk a little bit more about, okay, now you got all this great information. How do you do it? How do you get out and actually do the planting and the pruning and the management? And so I will go ahead and look to Jen with Hennepin County. If you would share your screen and unmute yourself.
All right, can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Cool. Let me just get one more thing up here. All right, good morning, everyone. My name's Jen Kullgren. I'm a forester with Hennepin County. And I'm just going to talk through a few items, kind of an overview of our forestry group, species, diversity, details that we use, highlight a few species that are kind of uncommon, and then I think that will take us to the end. So let's see. This will. All right, so Hennepin County, if you're not familiar with Hennepin County, it's located, the picture in the bottom left, you can see kind of that orange county that pops out. That's where Minneapolis is and 44 other cities. It's quite a large county, spans from very urban, kind of the urban core, to very rural areas in western Hennepin County. And so our forestry group, there's 3 of us, and we are in charge of, we have a gravel bed nursery that I can talk about a little bit at the end in more detail with, we have about 1,500 different trees that come in every year, and we use those trees on projects throughout Hennepin County. And we are responsible for managing trees on county property. So that would be at facilities, including libraries and corrections facilities, and then also all along county roads too. So we have hundreds of miles of county roads. And so we're working to kind of, in light of climate change, plant more trees along those roads where it's appropriate. And then the last big component that we have is called the Healthy Tree Canopy Grant Program. And so this really is focused on responding to emerald ash borer. And so it's about $500,000 every year where we're helping cities, affordable housing providers, schools, and nonprofits, where they send us their grant applications. And if they're awarded funds, they can use those funds to remove ash trees, to treat ash trees, to replant trees as well. And so so focusing on our gravel bed nursery, so like I had mentioned, we have about 1,500 trees that come in every year, and we're really focusing on species diversity. So I think that will be a theme throughout all of these presentations that you'll hear, mostly in light of emerald ash borer and the fact that with climate change, we know that there will be more pests and diseases that will continue to be an issue. And so we really want to create a robust planting palette where we can, try some new species to see how they're doing, and then also, make sure that we're planting a really diverse group of trees. So, for our grant program, these trees are, we have a species list that I'll mention in just a minute, where grantees are required to plant trees on the species list. And like Emma had mentioned, there are diversity guidelines where with those grantees, we look at what trees are already existing in that area and really try and plant something different. So we want to make sure we're not getting into the same issue with emerald ash borer or even Dutch elm disease. We want to really set ourselves up for success for that next pest or the changing climate that we're experiencing. So going back in our gravel bed, this year we have 55 different tree species. And I wanted to highlight some trees that are not traditional or maybe coming from a more southern range. So you can see the pictures on the right. That's the top right picture is a black gum tree. That's actually my favorite tree. I'm more familiar in the southern or kind of the Zone 5 area. But black gum has beautiful fall colors. It's a good kind of replacement tree for a maple if you're really wanting some bright, vibrant fall colors. And then also a few trees to highlight, and then I'll go into some details in just a minute. Cucumber magnolia is not very common in this area. And so, we're trying out some of these trees to see if we can get them to establish, if we can get them to withstand Minnesota winters. And we're kind of learning as we go along. So like, for example, London plane tree, we've planted some of those trees at some of our libraries. They do well in kind of more protected areas, but if you put them on a roadside and they're hit with a lot of salt, those trees won't do very well. So trying to kind of understand the nuances of what trees are doing well in certain areas. And a lot of the Zone 5 trees we're finding, if they're in a more protected area, maybe they're a little bit warmer, they're not susceptible to as much winter wind, they tend to survive a little bit better. So I wanted to highlight the Hennepin County recommended tree list, and I can share this after the meeting. But like I had said, so there's 110 different tree species on this list. And this is the list we give grantees that get money from us to plant trees throughout Hennepin County. We really want to make sure that they're planting a diverse palette of trees, but also want to highlight that they still need to consider the phrase right tree in the right place. So making sure there's, not planting large shade trees underneath power lines, making sure that they're planting trees that are can withstand some of that salt along roadsides. And, just considering what trees do well, understanding, what's the height and the spread of those trees, will it do well in that space, right? We don't, oftentimes people will plant very small trees right next to their house, and they don't realize that that's going to be a 75 to 100 foot tree. And then, those trees are causing problems into the future. Let's see. All right, so I just wanted to highlight a few species. So trees that have done well for us include the Dawn redwood. So the Dawn redwood can be a very large shade tree. It's actually a deciduous conifer. And so that means that it loses its needles every year. And then in the springtime, you'll get these lovely feathery needles that come back. It turns kind of an orange brown in the fall, and they can grow really fast. So they're a very large shade tree. They can get up to 100 feet tall if the conditions are appropriate. And they do well in zone mostly 5 through 8, but we've been able to plant them in the Twin Cities area, and they have survived the winters, and they're doing really well. They love full sun. They do well in wet environments. And just a fun fact, fossil records actually show that this tree was around 50 million years ago. So kind of a very impressive tree that I would say is underplanted and underrepresented in Minnesota currently. And then the tree on the right is a Katsura tree. So this tree has done really well along some of our county road sites. It does well in park-like settings. This is more of a medium-sized tree. It can get up to about 40 to 50 feet tall, so you still wouldn't want to plant them under those power lines. Beautiful fall colors. So this is a great option if someone says, I really want something that has that wonderful fall foliage. This is a great option. It has very adorable heart-shaped leaves that you can see in the picture on the top right. And they're also kind of zone 4 to 8. I know there's some people here that are living more in zone 3, and so that species, the recommended tree list that I can share, there are a lot of options on that list for zone 3. One thing to note about Katsura is they don't tolerate drought very well. So you really have to make sure to stay on top of maintenance. And both of these trees, there are no known pest and disease issues. So that's really something that we're looking for when we're planting trees, is to, there aren't known pests and diseases right now, but we're still trying to diversify and find those trees that do well in urban areas and don't have those pest and disease issues. So then just 2 more species that I want to highlight that we found that have done really well. On the left-hand side, you can see Turkish hazelnut. So that's, again, a medium-sized tree. You can plant it on the boulevard. It also does well in a park setting. It is a slower growing tree, but something nice that's different about this tree is that the nuts are edible. So sometimes people enjoy, an added benefit to the tree. And then it does work well more in zones kind of 4 to 7. I would say these are not planted very often, even in the metro. So this is a tree that we're kind of trying out to see how well they do. I think they've been doing pretty well so far. And then Leslie had already mentioned the yellow wood. So it's, again, a medium-sized tree. It's a little bit smaller than the Turkish hazelnut. It's got these beautiful hanging clusters of white flowers in the springtime. And then this is also a tree that's kind of zone 4 to 8. It has seed pods in the fall, and then a soft, kind of nice yellow color in the fall. So then one other thing that we're doing, we have a nursery at Hennepin County where we actually go out and we're collecting seeds. So we're finding trees that are maybe underrepresented or are found more in southern areas. We're collecting those seeds and then we're trying to propagate those trees. So an example would be a tulip tree. And there is a large tulip tree. It's been around for probably 60 plus years that we're able to collect seed from, and then we're actually trying to grow those out and propagate those seeds with the idea that that tree has really, dealt with the Minnesota winters. It's more of a southern species, but we're trying to find, trees that might be better in this climate in the future, and then trying to plant those trees. So we've had moderate success. I wouldn't say that that's our specialty of growing trees specifically from this method, but we're trying to kind of dabble in this and see if this is an effective way to potentially grow trees to then provide, at tree giveaways and that avenue. And then lastly, just kind of bringing in the human element to all of this. So a couple years ago, we created a tree prioritization map. So we're not able to plant trees everywhere. We have a limited amount of stock. And so this map is really looking at canopy cover. It brings in some metrics, including climate change, like heat island impacts, flooding risks, and then also the human element. So thinking about disparity reduction, that's a big priority at Hennepin County. And so where are kind of more vulnerable populations located that generally have lower tree canopy, and how can we work to prioritize those areas? So we use this map in our grant application selection, and then also where we internally are planting trees along county roads. And there will be a link where you can kind of go through this map and see the different the methods that were included in this. And that is all I have. So here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And then I think Kristen will send resources after the presentation.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Jen. I think there's a couple questions. We're going to hold off on doing questions we'll do 2 more presentations and then have some more time for Q&A, but continue to put those in the chat or raise your hand. And right now we're going to move over to Jeff Habermen, City Forester with the City of Rochester. We heard a little bit about Rochester from Leslie earlier, and excited to hear a little bit more now, Jeff.
All right, let me try to share my screen here. Of course, it's not working now.
It's loading. I don't think that's your presentation, though.
No. What the heck? It was working earlier. Let's see here. I don't get it.
Sometimes it wants you to share a presentation that you don't want, so you just can browse to find the right one.
Maybe what I need to do is close some things up here. This seems to be coming from, wants to connect to a shared calendar. I'm getting a message I can't connect. I can't display the content.
I can pull it up for you.
And I'm seeing the presentation, but it's not
displaying for us. I know. I run into this too.
Here, I have another way. I'm just going to try one last thing here. Because I made a couple of small changes since I sent that to you.
Okay.
Sorry. Let me see if this works. I apologize.
No problem. Well, maybe while you're pulling that up, one of the questions I don't think has been answered from Samantha for any of you is it better to plant larger trees now so that they're there, or is there any scientific evidence that planting a smaller tree helps it establish quicker and therefore grow a little bit more quickly? I think I summarized that more or less, Samantha. Any thoughts from any of our presenters or anyone else on that?
There are a few different ways you could look at it. The smaller containerized trees are less likely to have developed the problems that trees develop when they sit in containers for a long amount of time. So it may be healthier stock without as many interventions from you. I would say a different way to look at it would be that a smaller tree costs you less to get into the ground and may require a little bit less water per average tree. So for the amount of money that you have to do your tree planting, it could do good things by extending your planting further across your community. Just a couple ways to look at it.
Great. Well, Jeff, it looks like we're seeing your slides now, so you should be good to go.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. So I was asked to talk about 3 different topics, including our emerald ash borer management activities, and as well as tree species diversification that we're using as a result of losing some ash trees, and then also how we're repurposing some of the wood that we're gleaning from that. So I'll begin with emerald ash borer management. First of all, EAB was first detected here in August of 2015. So we're at about 5.5 to 6 years into our infestation. And I'm sure a lot of communities that are in attendance today are probably dealing with EAB as well. But that is the beginning of the peak mortality years. So hopefully we're starting to feel the effects of some of our management tactics. Initially, we started out with 6,000 trees in our inventory. Our tree inventory is not complete. It does not include natural areas. And so it basically includes ash or trees that are on boulevards or in maintained areas of our parks. So we went to work right away to try to quantify the number of ash we had within 100 feet of our bike paths in natural areas or borders of residential properties or parks. And we found that we had another 2,000 trees in those areas that we would need to manage. So today we still have 4,000 of those 6,000 ash trees in our inventory. And I'll try to explain the reasons why I feel that that is still the case. And it relates to the management plan strategies from our EAB management plan that we created in March of 2016. So some of the main goals of that plan are to detect and suppress the infestation. So each year we conduct annual inspections of our ash trees that are in our inventory, and we look for trees that are either infested or woodpecked. And then we make decisions based on the information in our tree inventory on how to handle them. We try to identify woodpeck trees because some research out of the U of M indicated that removing woodpeck trees will help suppress the population. And so we treat those as infested. We were a little bit leery at the beginning, and so we did some double checking to make sure that the woodpeck trees did in fact have EAB, and of course they did. And so based on the condition of the tree, once it's identified as infested or woodpecked, we'll either move it into our treatment program if the condition rating merits that, or it's removed. And hopefully we can utilize wood from the logs of those trees. We do try to preserve structurally sound trees through a chemical injection program. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, so I won't dwell on that right now. Of course, we're trying to improve our species diversity in the face of having to lose so many trees. And also a strategy is to postpone and decrease our peak ash mortality. So what that means is we treat some trees, even though we may not intend to treat them for their entire life or the life of our management plan, we treat them to keep them alive so that we're not overwhelmed with removals, a term that's called treating for staged removal. Our decisions may change on that particular aspect over time. As budgets don't seem to match what we need to manage EAB effectively, treating trees is a very cost-effective way to keep them alive, retain the benefits, and so it's quite possible that as we shift our management tactics that we'll continue to treat these trees longer than we first anticipated. And then we're very careful about how we manage the tree debris. Typically, all of our ash work is done in the wintertime during the non-flight season, and the debris is mulched or handled during that time so that we're not moving it around in the summer when we can spread the beetle around and cause further infestation. Some of the other management plan details is that it did call for the replacement of every lost tree, and we were able to do that for a period of time. But unfortunately, 2019, I believe, was the first year that our budget did not support replanting trees. But fortunately, we were able to acquire grant monies through the DNR, and that bridged that gap. So we have yet to not replace a tree. It's just a matter of how we're funding that work. We also have an ash treatment program, as I mentioned before. We utilize emamectin benzoate injected into the tree. Some people may have a question. That's a non-neonicotinoid product, and so it does have minimal effect on pollinators. We treat on a 3-year treatment cycle. While the label may suggest that you need to treat on a 2-year cycle, there's strong evidence to show that treatments can be extended and at a cost savings. As I mentioned before, we do base our treatments based on the condition rating of each tree. And to date, we currently have 3,000 trees that are in our treatment program. We're also part of a U of M research project that's studying the effects of treated trees on non-treated trees, the community immunity effect. And so this year we'll plan to bring another 500 or so trees into our treatment program, and that's probably going to be about the maximum that we can handle in-house with our staff. But that's 3,500 trees that won't be lost, that will continue to sequester carbon and provide benefits. We initially had a private property ash management program that was spelled out by ordinance. It regulated infested trees on private property. We did not mark woodpeck trees on private property. We had to prove infestation before we would mark them. But you can see at the picture at the right that this became quite a burden to some residents here. A lot of properties are larger in acres and have a lot of trees on them. And so because of that fact, City Council stepped in and said, we don't want you to regulate private property any longer. We think that should be the responsibility of the homeowners to manage themselves, unfortunately, because that kind of let the problem go unabated and spread more quickly, in my opinion. But when we were regulating on private property, we did all that work during the non-flight season as well. Inspections began in November and usually took us until about January to get through the entire town. Once a tree was marked on private property, they were sent a letter. They were given an option to treat the trees if they wanted, but they would have to find a certified arborist that would agree that the tree was in a treatable condition. And then if they provided an estimate of that work, they were given until July 1 of the following summer to get the tree treated. We would follow up on that, make sure the tree was treated with and marked with a tag. And then if they decided not to treat them, they had 20 days to remove the tree. Now I'll shift into species diversification. I know that a lot of discussions revolved around this already, but some of our considerations for diversity are we use our tree inventory very specifically. Currently, we have 86 species in our inventory, but we're trying to focus our planting efforts on those that have lower composition in our urban forest. We try to utilize trees that are native to the eastern deciduous forest. We don't necessarily prescribe to only Minnesota natives, but we are trying to avoid bringing trees in from other continents as much as possible. That being said, in order to support our diversity goals, we will consider trees not native to the eastern deciduous forest, but we do try to make sure that they're not going to present an invasive problem in the future. We are bringing up plants from higher zones. We're delving into zone 5, 6, and even 7, quite frankly. And currently we reside in zone 4B. I was glad to hear everyone's using the 2010-5, but I believe that the 30-20-10 isn't enough as well. But I also wanted to throw out some information that Dr. John Ball from the University of South Dakota, or South Dakota State University, has been recommending. And that's maybe even to go a little bit further and say that no more than 5% of any genus should comprise your inventory. He also has suggested that we look at genera with relatively low number of species. I know that I believe it was Emma talked about the maples having 134 or 38 species. So finding genera with low numbers of species kind of helps, if one species is figured out, for instance, in the maples, they're probably going to figure out all of them in a short period of time. So finding those genera with low species is just a way to kind of create a genetic cul-de-sac, if you will. And I can't go on talking about tree planting and diversification without talking about gravel bed systems either. I've been using one of these systems since 2006 personally, and Rochester's been using it since before I arrived here. But this is a picture of the gravel bed we had up in Fargo, North Dakota, where I previously worked. And you can see the amazing root systems that develop when the trees are basically planted in gravel for the summer. I'm not sure if it's the high oxygen content, of course it is, that really proliferates the fine root hairs, but you literally will need a machine to get them out of the gravel bed if you leave them in there long enough. But at that point, then they can be taken out from the gravel's shaken off. We dip everything into a hydrogel solution immediately when it gets taken out of the rock, and then either put in bags or into a covered truck or trailer where they're moved to the planting site. So you do have to be somewhat careful about how you handle them, but it's a phenomenal way to get great trees. And here are some of the species that we've been testing. I know some of these have been mentioned by others. The black gum, Zelkova, beech, Katsura, bald cypress, and many of these are doing quite well. In fact, we've got really we've had very good luck with some of the other species that others have mentioned, like yellowwood, redbud, Kentucky coffee tree, and even shagbark hickory. So these are some of the ways that we're trying to expand our species list in our inventory. And then finally, I wanted to just touch on our wood utilization. We're trying to repurpose more and more wood all the time. We've found a variety of uses. One of our Green Corps members that we had recently came up with this catchy little sign, "From the Ashes," citing that this wood was generated from urban wood, trees killed by emerald ash borer, which is a nice way to give credit where it's due. But basically, we turn logs into lumber, and there's a strong wood milling industry in this corner of the state. And so we're able to leverage that, and we can bring a person on site with a portable mill, and they convert these logs into this beautiful lumber. And this is our most recent milling project. You can see the stacks of lumber here that we created. I think to date, we've milled almost 10,000 linear feet, board feet of lumber from these projects. And we can use it, anything from unprocessed wood, which is the case here. In our natural playgrounds, the very left picture there is actually a very old, large silver maple that had to be removed because it was completely hollow. And I think it blew over. It was in a park. And so we salvaged the wood and we put it in our dog park, and the dogs just love it. They can crawl inside, over the top, and really have fun with that. But then we also use it in natural playgrounds. And the picture on the right is a themed on a Belgian patio, but we kind of had the logs raised at different levels so kids can hop and skip around on them. The center picture is actually just a landscape with a natural playground behind it. You can see one of the trees that was we found in the river, tipped it upside down, hired a wood carver to come in and carve a face on it. But all of this wood is just cut, in the field. It's not processed at all, other than the cutting into different lengths. Then we have projects where we use the wood where it's limited in its processing. And so the porta potty and dumpster enclosures, that's a project we started a couple years ago. We have over 100 sites throughout our parks with either porta potties or garbages that we plan to build these enclosures. Really, the picture on the left, the wood really was just milled, cut into lengths, and used. I think they did put some sort of a finish on it. I know the middle picture for sure had a stain put on it. And then more recently, we've started making benches for our parks. And I just included a couple examples, but we probably have 5 different styles of benches that we're making out of the milled lumber. And they're very well received. I mean, people just love it. They're practically furniture pieces out there compared to, other traditional benches, which, cost $500-600 a piece. And then these photos are just showing some of the more highly processed projects that we've used ash wood for. The finishing the bar at one of our golf course clubhouses. The chalkboard in the center, the wood that surrounds it is made from reclaimed ash wood. And then most recently on the right, this is a safe room at Quarry Hill Nature Center where we finished the walls with ash wood. And it's just remarkable how beautiful this wood is. And it certainly has a higher purpose than just being ground up into mulch. And that concludes the my presentation, and that's my email if anyone wants to reach out to me specifically, or I'm willing to entertain questions here too.
Thank you so much, Jeff. I really like those examples of how you're using the ash wood. And, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunities there for other communities in Minnesota to think about how to utilize that product in a way that is more beneficial to the community. So thank you for sharing those photos in that conversation. I'm seeing a couple questions pop up. Keep bringing those along, but we're gonna go ahead and move over to our last presentation with Mary. Mary, I'll let you say your last name.
Yeah, Groeninger.
Groeninger. Thank you. While you're getting your slides up, Mary is with the Friends of Trees of Ely, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to utilize volunteers.
Yeah, so hold on, I'm getting all new messages, of course. Let's see if I can get that. Okay, can you see my slideshow okay?
Yes.
All
thanks.
right. So yeah, thanks for having me. My presentation is going to be a little bit different, because I think the main reason we were brought along was because we in Ely, we're a very small city, and we don't have, unfortunately, a tree department or a city forester. We can't afford that in the city. And so what we were faced with, I think it was 2012 now, which was the city announcing that they were going to cut down. Now, we had a monoculture of silver maples on our boulevards, that they were going to cut down the remaining, I think they were going to cut down 80 of those trees, which would have basically decimated our forest, and they had no plans to replant. And so they were just very, very not tree oriented, very much just oriented toward infrastructure that did not include trees at that point. So as a result, we are a completely volunteer and community-based tree planting and tree maintenance program that's been going on now since 2012. And again, it started with, you can see right here, one of these we had these silver maples that were 80 to 100 years old. Then they did need to, there's no question that these trees are needing to go, but 80 at once was not a healthy way to do it, and certainly not planting anything was a way to, so there was this huge community uproar. Ely's really good at those. And the good thing as a result is that we did develop a tree board and also a group called the Friends of the Trees of Ely, and Val Destrick, who is also here with me, and I were there from the beginning, and we both have served until very recently, like this last month, on both the tree board and the Friends of the Trees of Ely. We're now leaving the tree board to other hands so that we can kind of develop the Friends of the Trees of Ely. So what I'm going to do is just focus on what it looks like in a community where you don't have paid leadership, and how you do this. So I'm very photo focused here, okay? And my main focus in this presentation has been on the absolute critical importance of partnership. In fact, Val and I have been texting back and forth, and she's just like looking at that last presentation and say, let's partner with the shop teacher and get some benches in the park. So we're constantly thinking about partnerships, and also just to show you some of the work that we're doing here. Okay, so our first partnership was with the University of Minnesota. You can see here, this is where we were part at Tree Inventory Project. We were like, I think the last community, or one of the last two communities to sign up for that. That was really invaluable for us. It really gave us so much credibility with the city. I can't tell you, we faced a lot of skepticism and hostility from the city when we first started, but the fact that we were able to get some like the University of Minnesota, Gary Johnson, come to the city, talking to them, get this sort of official report, really gave us a lot of credit and got us going. Not to mention the things that they helped us with. So that's assessing our city trees. And we did that, and these were our volunteers at the time. So from the very beginning, and I think one of the strengths of our program that you'll see in my photos that I really want to emphasize is how intergenerational we've been, and how we really try to get the entire community involved in. One of the benefits of University of Minnesota. I don't need to talk about this because we just heard all about the benefits of gravel beds, but one of the benefits was in return for doing that survey, they basically gave us the money and to build a gravel bed. And so we did that, and you can see our fabulous gravel bed and kind of what the before and after is in those trees. We don't always plant, but a couple years ago well, the city's in the process of trying to make us move it, so that's been a little bit of an issue, but we love gravel bed trees. You can see her here, Valerie McClanahan, who came up from she was working at the U at the time, and so she came up and did our very first, and this is our first tree that we ever planted on the boulevard. So it's kind of exciting, and it's a big old tree right now. It's great. In fact, we're like, oh, we need to go give that guy a good pruning. So here she is teaching us how to box roots. So that training was super important at the beginning because none of us knew any of this stuff. And again, we are completely volunteer based. So one of the really important things that we have to do is always train our volunteers on how to properly box roots, get those, especially obviously with the container trees, not with the gravel bed trees, but and then also how to prune. All of this stuff's volunteer based. So training us so that we can train other people has been super important. We also did at the time, and again, this was still with the U, a lot of community outreach. So Gary came up and presented the results of the tree inventory to the city. We had a really good turnout. That was up at our college for that. So this was still when people were just really angry, and it really helped it helped the community see that, okay, there's this group of people that are really going to make a difference and care about our city trees, are going to do something. And it also, again, bought us a lot of credit from the city, which became really important moving forward. That's also Valerie, also at a city meeting, talking about, I can't remember what she was talking about. It was something about, it was about the importance of tree diversity. So again, just this education for us. It's all about educating the entire community, not just the paid professionals, because we don't have any, right? So we got to get it. We got to get everybody involved. Okay. So another really important thing for us, I'm gonna and I'll get into our partnership with the DNR here in a minute, but has been fundraising from the beginning. At first, we are now, I'm happy to say, a line item in the city budget, and so there is some money for funding trees, but at first there was none, and so we really had to rely on fundraising, and so we partnered. I read early on, you've got to partner with everybody. Do not be picky about who you partner with. And so we did. So this was a grant that we got from the Ely Area Community Board, which is just, that's an obvious one. But our other one over there was a little more controversial because we partnered with Twin Metals, and there's a giant mining controversy up here. And so there were a lot of people who really wanted trees who were like, how dare you partner with Twin Metals? And we're like, you know what? We're partnering with whoever will partner with us to give us a $5,000 grant, which was huge at the beginning. And they got the mayor on board because our mayor was totally pro mining. And so I just am saying that, we were like trees. Our focus is trees, getting trees on the boulevard. So that's where we are there. So yeah, to this day, we have people who are kind of, why'd you do that? And no, we had good reasons for do that, and it helped our overall project. So we also, this is my favorite tree funding thing from the very beginning. We got kids involved. So this is my daughter and her friend, and they tie-dyed socks and sold them at a local fair that we have and raised money for the trees. So again, there's nothing like a couple of cute little girls to get a lot of people on board with your project. So and I'm pulling, by the way, all these photos off of our Facebook page, which has also been a really important way for us to get the news out to the community. Then we partnered with the DNR. We got one of those, I cannot remember the name of the grant, but it was a great grant. It went on for multi-years. Maybe one of you guys could chip in, Emma, maybe to tell us, because it had a long name that I kept forgetting. But anyway, it gave us money for trees, money for supplies, and I think almost even more importantly, again, continued to provide all kinds of training for us so that with the focus on us being able to go out and train other people. So this was Ashley Reichard, I think, providing some volunteer tree. We had a tree stewardship training program, which was really successful. We have a forestry program at our college, so a lot of the students took advantage of that, as well as community members. And this is her teaching everybody how to plant a tree. And she also would came up at other times and did some pruning training, which was really important. And we did the certified arborist training as part of that grant. So all of that training was just really crucial for us. So community education has been a really important part because, again, we're a small town and we needed people, everybody on board. And this is why I cannot emphasize enough just involving everybody, setting politics aside as much as we could just for the good of the trees, because we are a very divided city. And so community education was super important. And this is just two examples of things. One thing is just teaching people. We got a lot of gator bags through our DNR grant, and then just teaching people how to use them correctly, because everybody kept missing that hole and thinking somehow that if they put the hose down the center of the gator bag that was going to magically fill it up. So I mean, it was just a little wacky. So that was my explanation on our Facebook page, but we had to do a lot of one-on-one. And then also, you can't really see them, but we had these great door hangers that we created. There was another nonprofit that had this information. I emailed them and they said, yeah, absolutely, you can use it, make door hangers, use that information all you want. So we had these great door hangers about proper mulching and about where to report any damage to trees and watering their trees. And we put them anywhere that a new tree is planted. And we're just making up some new ones for our Arbor Day Festival, which is going to happen here soon. So that sort of public education has been really, really important. And again, that DNR grant helped us do that, along with another nonprofit that let us use their stuff. This is one of my favorites, which is partnering with the school. And this is Val and I going to teach the kindergartners about mulching trees. And this is really important to us because a lot of our trees, especially our young trees, have gotten just ripped apart by, one of our old tree board members says, oh, it's those dang 10-year-old girls again, right? But it's like teenagers coming along and just tearing down trees, and it's really disheartening. And so our attitude from the beginning is the way we've got to be teaching the younger generation about how to care for trees and just making them realize that the public trees are their trees. And so when we can get into the school and talk to kindergartners or whatever, we're all about that. So this was just one of the sweetest things we ever did. They were so excited to plant that tree. So which then, by the way, did get mowed over by a four-wheeler, a teenager. And so, again, speaking to the value of starting young and just getting those little kids. And we talk to them all the time about how to be advocates and what to see. If you see somebody bullying a tree, here's what are you going to say? So we just work on that. And it's just, we really want people to see the trees as the community project. Okay, so here's our planting, just some photos of our planting days. There's a tree from our gravel bed that's going in the ground. There's somebody boxing roots. We rely really heavily, and we've learned this from experience. We've actually, even though we say we want to open up to everybody, when it comes to planting, with few exceptions, we rely really heavily on our Forest Service students at the college, because we just find they listen and they have motivation to do things correctly, and we don't have to replant trees that well-meaning volunteers have planted too deeply or just in too much of a rush. So planting is something we do try to be selective about our volunteers, but it's still, you're going to see, there's my daughter with just demonstrating how easy it is to lift a gravel bed tree. You'll see a lot of kids who are like 18 to 25, and that's because it's a lot of college students that we have here. This was our latest planting, and I'm not going to talk about diversity, but that has been really important for us. We are very limited in Ely because of where we live in northern Minnesota. We are still zone 3, 4-ish. We've been trying some trees and they have been doing pretty well. We also, as you can see, have pretty small boulevards, and so finding species has been a challenge in some of the trees, but we've been experimenting widely with a lot of the trees that have been mentioned here. Some have worked great, some have not worked at all, so it's just all about experimentation. There's Val and I over to the left of your screen, our first tree planting. Those trees were planted 7 years ago, and now we're looking really good. And there's our we always feed our volunteers. That's Friends of the Trees will often provide snacks and lunch and feed our volunteers. So again, that's kind of how we pay people. And then this is our other really, really big important project that we're doing. We have one coming up now. May 1st is our Arbor Day. Our Arbor Day Festival is a mulching party. Our mulch does come from those old maples that are getting more gradually taken down now. So here we have, you can see people of all ages, and this is the one we just get everybody, and we partner with Ely Community Resources. I'll show you. Then we get families in. Ely Community Resources, this is, you can see Julie Hignell there on our left is our Ely Community Resources person, and that is our primary agency that works with children and youth. And she has, this year, she's like paying for almost everything in this, you know, she's paying for our food, she's paying for those door knockers. She's got a grant, another grant that she's using to pay for this, and because she's doing intergenerational stuff. And the more people of all ages we can get to our Arbor Day mulching party, the better. It's just really popular. We think we had like 100 people at our last one. And then we give them lunch too, and we read the proclamation. And right there with that is the girl who got a hat, the hat that Tree City gave us. She got the hat because she read the proclamation 2 years ago at our last festivity. So I'm just going to end here with, let me see if I had anything else that I needed to say to you guys. Just made some notes to myself. Yeah, again, just partnering, involving as many people as possible, educating the community the best we can. And I can tell you that it's been pretty remarkable. We have our frustrations, but it's been very remarkable, the turnaround from the city in their attitude toward trees. And the way that we can stamp out fires for the city, I think they've appreciated that when they do have to take out a bunch of trees. Generally, if I post something on our Facebook page and it always gets picked up and published in the newspaper, I don't even have to go there, people stop whining, or most of them do anyway. So we have a lot of credit in the community, and it's really gone away. And I just wanted to end with this, which is our Tree City USA. This is our very first, our sign that we put up. We're now on 7 years, I think, of our Tree City USA. Thanks to Emma, who's really patient, because I always hand the dang thing in as late as possible, and she still certifies us. So thank you, Emma. Yeah, and that's all I've got. Again, I'll take questions if people have them. But
thank you so much, Mary. I think it's a really important, piece of the conversation on how we get this work done in our communities, especially smaller communities, like you said, that don't have city foresters on the payroll. So this is really great to hear about your partnerships. We are down to 4 minutes. So I think we have captured all of the comments and questions in the chat. If there's anyone that has a question that they are just interested in sharing, please feel free to unmute yourself. Also, Mary, there was one question if you might be able to share your door hanger image or content.
Absolutely, we're looking for it right now. And so that's at ECR, the ones who printed it last time. So if we can find it, I will definitely share it. So
perfect. Yeah. I do want to pull up a couple more slides here for you all with some more additional resources before we wrap up. So just a reminder, bringing it back to the Green Step Cities and Tribal Nations program. This is a list of all of the best practice actions on our website that relate to trees in some way, shape, or form. And so there is a lot of content, best practice, guidance, implementation tools, and resources on the website for you to take a look at. So this will be in the follow-up email to you all as well. And then with that, you heard a lot about these resources today, but there's a lot of good tools out there for Minnesota tree selection, guidelines or considerations as you're looking forward in your own communities. And then lastly, just to wrap up, our next workshop will be May 19th, and we'll be talking about how to support Minnesota pollinators species through habitat and pesticide reduction. And so you can sign up at eventbrite.com. You just search Green Step or find that on our website as well. And with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. Like I mentioned before, we'll send a follow-up email to you all with the webinar recording, the PowerPoint slides, contact information, and some resource links. So it'll probably be a pretty big one this time around, but all of that will be shared with you. Do follow up with any of our presenters today and ask any additional questions that we might not have been able to get to today. But I thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Hope to see you next month.